So there's this professor from the University of Toronto, Jordan Peterson. He's been lighting up the internet recently. He is for free speech. He will not be silenced. You're going to see, rather than me tell you everything, you're going to see in this video a lot that's been going on very, very recently with he speaking his mind about new laws and the university trying to silence him, and well, you'll get all that coming up. Here's where the professor is at this very day. He just uploaded this video.
So I released, this is the third of 3 videos that I'm releasing this morning, and the first one, I just read the letter from the university administration requesting my silence, and then in the second one I detailed out my response and said that I was going to meet with the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, David Cameron. And I had gone to meet with David on Friday to discuss what had happened and to discuss the letter. And we had a good meeting. And he's a reasonable person. And so I suggested, because I thought before the meeting, and I talked to my family, I thought, well, what's the best possible way this could move forward so that it would be in everyone's best interest, mine and the universities and the broader public and the students and everyone. And so we thought that the best thing to happen would be that the university could agree to host a debate, a public debate about the issue, about Bill C-16 and about legislation like it. And that would be officially hosted by the university, and I could present my case, and whoever wanted to present their case contrary to what I've been stating would be invited to. And so the dean, David Cameron, said that he had to talk to some people and that he would get back to me as soon as possible. And so over the weekend he talked to Merrick Gertler, who's the president of the university, and the provost, Cheryl Regier, and the VP of HR, Kelly Hannah Moffat. And
well, this is a very encouraging turn of events. Let's listen some more.
they agreed to go forward with it. And so I was thrilled, and I still am thrilled. And it's so good, because that means, you know, one of the things we talked about was that we could talk about this like civilized human beings, and we could discuss the real issues here. And maybe as well, we could use the University of Toronto as a model to all universities who've been dealing with this sort of thing, about how to actually deal with it, like people who are rational and intelligent and careful and thoughtful and all of that. And so they agreed to the public debate, and we talked about 2 other issues. One was they were concerned during the meeting about the possibility of security violations, you know, demonstrations and that sort of thing. And so they thought for a while about only holding it online, but they decided not to do that, to do it as a university function, live, which is exactly right. And we talked about security concerns and agreed, at least tentatively, that the rule would be that unwarranted disruptions will be stopped, so that, because both sides are going to be represented in this debate. And I hope they can find someone articulate and intelligent to make a case for the other side, because that's what we want. So anyways, look, this is unbelievably good news. It's unbelievably good news, because it means the university has decided to uphold its position as an investigator into complex intellectual matters, and that we can discuss this like civilized human beings. And so my kudos to the University of Toronto. And, you know, I've said from the beginning that this is an institute that I've respected and admired, and I'm grateful to for providing me with the position that I have. And I'm so absolutely thrilled that they decided to do the right thing. And not only that, and I got to tell you, and this is God's honest truth, David thanked me for bringing the issues to their attention, and he meant it. So, hooray! It's so good. So, strike one, you know, mark one up on the wall for free speech and for the University of Toronto. So, and I'd like to thank all the people that have been supporting me. It's been very helpful, and your letters were very useful. And, you know, we can talk these things through. So let's do it. Excellent. Bye.
Now, with the latest out of the way, we're going to revisit what's been happening in the last few weeks that's led up to this.
Okay, so back to agreeableness. Now, so the big difference between men and women in terms of traits seems to be, so you could put first of all, I should show you. Let's see if I got this here. Yeah. So there's two overlapping normal distributions, okay? And the blue ones are women and the red ones are men. And the blue is agreeableness. Like the blue is shifted over to the more agreeable side and the red is shifted over to the less agreeable side. The first thing that you should notice about that isn't that the differences exist. The first thing that you should notice is that almost all of the territory is overlapped. And so what that means is that if you took men and women, if you drew men and women randomly from the population, there'd be a deviation from 50-50 with regards to who was the most agreeable individual. But at least, now, maybe it'd be 60% probability that you draw out a woman who was as more agreeable and 40% probability that you draw out a man, you know, as a deviation from 50-50. So there's lots of women who are more disagreeable than men, and there are lots of men who are more agreeable than the typical woman. But there are differences, and one of the things that's really worth noting when you look at a normal distribution, because this is where things get weird. So you could say, there's not that much difference on average between men and women, but the thing is the average is often not the relevant issue. The relevant issue is often the extreme. So for example, if you're going to imprison people, so look at that red curve. What you see is that if you, although it's not drawn exactly perfectly, but what you would see if the curve was proper here, is that once you were out here, say where you were only interested in the 1 out of 50 most disagreeable person, all those people would be men. And that's why, partly why, almost everybody in prison is male. So because you don't put people in prison unless they're very extreme, and one of the things criminals tend to be extreme in is their low in agreeableness. Surprise, surprise. They're kind of callous. They're in it for themselves. You know, they're stubborn. They don't care about you one way or another. And if they're low in agreeableness and in conscientiousness, then they don't care about you and they aren't going to play by the rules. That's starting to touch on psychopathy.
Well, I've had a number of people in my clinical practice over the last few years whose lives have been seriously disrupted by politically correct activity in the workplace, I would say. And I have a number of other people in my social network who keep me apprised of various goings-on in the media on political issues in general, not specifically necessarily about political correctness, although that often comes up. And I got 2 emails last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I guess now, one on Bill C-16 and then one on the University of Toronto's HR department's decision to make anti-racism and anti-bias training mandatory for the HR staff. And you mentioned the book, the second book that I have coming out. I've been writing to some degree about political events in that book. And so I've been preoccupied with this sort of thing very actively for the last year, but all of my fundamental line of research as well, by the way, is on authoritarianism and ideology and the deep roots of ideological belief and the role that belief plays in structuring people's emotions and motivations. So I have a number of reasons for being interested in this, but the proximal one was being informed about Bill C-16 and the University of Toronto HR department's plans. And I don't know, I just thought that it was bothering me enough that I needed to articulate what I thought. You know, so I don't like the feeling of being stifled in my expression. And I thought, well, I've got to sort this out. And of course, a big part of the way that people think is by talking. And I thought, well, I'll try to formalize an argument and I'll post it. And that way I can formalize the argument, see what I have to say. William James once said, how do I know what I think before I write it down? And of course, speaking and writing are forms of thinking. And so I made these videos and, well then, you know, they got a lot of attention, to say the least, which was quite interesting to me because, you know, when the chairman of the psych department called me in a while back to remind me that I was responsible for following the University of Toronto's internal policies and the law, one of the things that she pointed out was that I brought this on myself, so to speak. And, you know, fundamentally, that's rubbish. This video that I produced, or the couple of videos I produced, wouldn't have got the attention they got unless something was in the air. You know, there's a context surrounding this. And the thoughts that I articulated struck a chord. And, you know, the chord they struck differed with different people, right? It struck a particular kind of chord among the radical right, among the center right, among the center left, and among the radical left. But it attracted an insane amount of attention. And that's because there's a problem.
Before we get into the specifics of Bill C-16, have there been any either covert or manifest repercussions that have arisen at the University of Toronto as a function of you having produced these videos?
Here is a few examples of some of the manifest repercussions that he was being asked about.
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson, do you have any comments on the Nazi presence at your protest? The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
Then why are you...
Why were they here?
Well, how can I answer
Are there views in alignment with yours? At some point you have to realize...
I think that's a foolish question. Look, if you want to know what my views are...
I've watched all of your videos, yes.
Including...
Yes, I have.
Yes.
Then why would you ask such a question?
Because this is my interpretation of your videos.
Apparently,
all of the people who arranged the protest against you watched all of your videos.
Like, do you want to disavow...
I have 150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay.
Do you want to disavow the support...
Could you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
So, I have 150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really think that you're worth all of that time?
So look, I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time. It's been 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
that sounds very much like a
they're
threat.
Going to come.
That sounds very much like a threat.
That
sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
You know, it's funny they don't mention the assault on Lauren Southern.
Are you experiencing oppression? Quit smiling, bitch. What you want?
Yeah, so they did grab me and pull me in and try to punch me. They're the person right over there with the black lipstick.
That's assault right there.
Officer, I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything that happened.
There's no reason to be
I didn't see anything.
You know, asking me continually freighted questions isn't very helpful if you actually want to have a dialogue. You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
What?
By they and them pronouns, would you refer to them by those pronouns?
Might depend on how they ask.
So no.
Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not
Why do I have the authority to determine what I say? What kind of question is that?
Why do you have the authority? Let me finish. Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not an individual is worthy of you using their pronouns? Like if I asked you, would you please use they them pronouns for me? What?
It would depend on what I thought of your motivation.
What hoops do you want us to jump through?
Those are my pronouns. Those are my
There's no motivation.
No, I know. No one ever has any motivation.
We're trying to survive. Politics are a product of our lives and us trying to live in this world. We're not trying to live in this world as a product of our politics. I was apolitical before I came out as trans. I got into politics because I needed to survive, to advocate against people like you, no offense. I have one quick question. Okay, so they, them pronouns are written into the Oxford English Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. It's actually the word of the year this year. And it does have historical continuity all the way back to Shakespeare. It is objectively an English word, singular they pronouns, grammatically correct. Do you think that you can choose to not respect something that is in the English language as a professor, as an academic, that you are going to, that you are,
absolutely, I am choosing.
You're ignoring rules of the English language to go out of your way to disrespect students.
That's your opinion, and I'm not going
to. It is my opinion.
Disrespect students.
We're saying it's disrespectful
anyway,
to us.
You don't get to decide what's disrespectful to us.
Right. So I kind of feel like
Yeah.
That's brave.
But so I feel like it's that approach that is also bothering me.
Yeah.
This approach where it's like I'm gonna rationalize this situation as a white man, a white academic man.
No, I gotta stop you there.
Can
you just for a second.
Okay.
Okay. Because I never introduced race into this dialogue, and I'm not treating you like a black woman. I'm treating you like a human being. And so to introduce race into the dialogue, I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's helpful for what you're after, and that's partly why I'm doing this. I think that our society has become so obsessed with group identity that we're pushing in a counterproductive direction.
Okay, so I think that I disagree.
Is that I'm being required by emergent legislation to alter the way I voluntarily speak. I'm not doing it. And if it happens to hurt some people's feelings around the specific issue that has given rise to this, then so be it. Hurting people's feelings is not necessarily a bad thing.
Why? I didn't say hurting people's feelings.
Well, harming them in what way? Harming them how?
Hurting people. What you're saying is we don't know. So doing that, it could be more than
but you can say that about anything, any speech.
I know, but I'm saying in this case we don't know.
Well, as you can see, the opponents of free speech are capable of making a lot of inarticulate noise. All right, so I want to tell you a couple of things about what this isn't about as far as I'm concerned. Right. I'm not going to talk about sexual politics. It's not my primary concern. What I'm going to talk about is freedom of speech, and I want to tell you a few things about freedom of speech, okay? Because I've been thinking about this very carefully. I've been thinking about this very carefully over the last 2 weeks. And it's partly because of the videos that I've made.
I thought you don't like cops, though.
But also because...
This nonsense. He's brilliant. For real. He's brilliant.
Okay. Let's try this again. Right. So there's a reason I'm defending freedom of speech. And the reason for that is quite straightforward. The reason I'm defending freedom of speech is because that's how people with different opinions settle their opinions in a civil society. And if we lose that, now here's what's happened with Bill C-16 and the surrounding legislation. Free speech is the mechanism by which we keep our society functioning. It's a consequence of free speech and the ability to speak. People can put their finger on problems, articulate what those problems are, solve them, and come to a consensus. And we risk losing that. Now, you can say there should be reasonable restrictions on free speech, and that's the case. You shouldn't be allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater. And reasonable people can discuss and debate what those restrictions should be. But we can't debate the fact that putting restrictions on free speech is something dangerous beyond comprehension. And that's what we're faced with. Now, we've had laws passed in this country that regulate what people can say. What people can't say. And that's reasonable. But it seems to me that we're in danger of crossing a line. With Bill C-16 and its surrounding legislation, it's the first time I've seen in our legislative history where people are attempting to make us speak their language. That's not something that I'm willing to do. Now, the radical left activists are trying to turn this into an argument about sexual politics. And it's only nominally about sexual politics. It's about language that's designed to control our freedom of expression. Now, I've received
and many comments from friends of mine and colleagues who've been criticizing everything I say. No wonder. I don't speak perfectly, and my arguments aren't perfectly formulated. Neither are anyone else's. And we have to be able to say what we have to say badly, or we won't be able to think at all. And I know where that leads. I've studied totalitarianism for 4 decades, and I know how it starts. It starts with the restriction of freedom of speech. Here's what I recommend. You all have consciences. You all have the ability to articulate.
Professor Peterson sure does have a point about free speech. And look how these people are reacting to him trying to talk about having free speech. That is shame.
From people on the radical right.
What are you taking to school, honey? What are you taking to school? How dare you deny the human rights? How dare you? What are you taking to school? What are you children taking? Children. What are you guys taking to school? Not this guy over here, not the white knight, but you people. What are you people taking?
All right, so I've received terrible information from people on the far right last week. And it's terrifying. I will tell you, if we keep pushing too hard on the fringes of the radical left, we're going to produce a counter response that we do not want to see.
What he's warning of here is not a threat. It's just an observation. People on the authoritarian left are pushing and pushing and pushing. And a lot of people are thinking of the rise of Donald Trump is due to all the political correctness on steroids. People telling us how to think and how to talk and what to say. Professor Peterson is quickly becoming a folk hero, a champion of free speech, someone that is fighting against the authoritarian and regressive left. He's got a lot to say about it, and I'm going to close this video with some thoughts, some contradictory thoughts that he's expressed with the God said.
Because, look, here's another example that goes along with yours. The transgender argument for early onset gender identity issues is that a person can be a man born in a woman's body. Okay, so we'll say man is gender identity. Well, that's obviously a biologically deterministic argument, because if you're a man born in a woman's body and you're born that way, then culture hasn't had its chance to affect your gender identity. So you can't argue on the one hand that gender identity can be biologically determined and fixed in the case of a mismatch between the identity and the biological sex, but that in all other instances it's fluid. And, you know, the American Psychological Association, in its handbook on human sexuality, has already indicated that gender identity and sexual preference are to be regarded as fluid. Okay, but then that also, then there's another issue that comes up. So there is legislation now, and certainly a lot of activism surrounding the idea of conversion therapy. You know, and you can think of conversion therapy as having two elements. One is the conversion of people who have homosexual sexual preferences into heterosexuals. And there's a biologically deterministic argument being used by those on the left to forbid such practices. But if they're fluid, which is another claim that the radical left is making, then there's no reason that conversion therapy isn't appropriate if someone requires it. And that's the case not only for sexual preference, but also for gender identity. And so if it's fluid, there's no reason not to talk transgender people back into their, let's say, normative gender identity. So it's a complete mess. It's a complete logical mess. But I would say that, you know, if you look at the personality predictors of belief on the left side of the political spectrum, you find that people who are left-leaning are high in trait openness, which is a kind of creativity, and low in conscientiousness, particularly orderliness. And what that means to me is they're attracted to all sorts of wild ideas, and it doesn't matter to them a damn bit if they're coherent. and I do mean that.
Right. I want